So thank you very much for the invitation of URP of Osaka City University, and also quite nice to listen Hyunbang's very condensed theoretical foundation. So the topic I'm going to present is called Megacity Betas for Taiwan, Housing and Gender in Neoliberalization and Democratization. I'm going to share my experience about how I search for theoretical foundation for my research. And being an East Asia urban scholar, I'm always looking for a good theory that can help me to advance the analysis. And this is a journey I want to share with you now. And the second one, I want to talk about my empirical studies. And so the first one, I want to talk about how neoliberalization affects urban policies in Taiwan. They concur with democratization since the 1980s. And the second one, I want to talk about gender aspects of housing problems. And as a researcher, I always very concerned about the solution. So based on my research about social housing in Taiwan, and I kind of seeking a solution. And my solution would be more democratic involvement to improve social inequality and women's status. I began to interest in housing research when I was a very young graduate student. I participated in the first housing movement in Taiwan. And since then, my research has been heavily influenced by the housing movements. And I have to thank activists and scholars in East Asia and Europe who have helped me to develop my research questions and inspire me to many new ideas of housing that help the disadvantaged people in the cities. So the first, there are many people doing urban research about East Asia, like me, always start from the theory of developmental state. And the theory of developmental states has some limitation because the theory, when it was developed, it mainly focused on the state and market rather than the state and housing market. Therefore, it's not easy to use this theory to interpret the urban problems in East Asia. The role of real estate developers and the production of housing are neglected in developmental state theories. But it's quite luckily, most scholars later further developed the concept. For example, like Joseph Wang, he's a professor at the University of Toronto now. He compares health care between South Korea and Taiwan during the time of democratization. He emphasized how the introduction of democratic reform changed the political logic of social policy reform. He looked at the election and the introduction of democratic reform changed the political logic of social policy reform. And both seeking politics, election become very important, so it's needed to promote popular policies, and healthcare reform advocates from bureaucrats to grassroots activists adapted this new political context. And Bi-Kyun Park, later he will present later, and he did a pioneer work very early to compare housing in Singapore and South Korea. Park argued that it's important to look at political relations between the state and social groups, not just the state. This research improved the limitation of statist theory, and they also made democratization become a very important factor. And there are many dynamic relationships between the state and the society. And the second theory I have been looking at neoliberalism, and you know it's a very powerful ideology since the 1980s in the Western countries, and it began to impact Asia gradually. So the book edited by Bi-Kyun Park, Richard Child Hill, and Asato Seto is another quite important work, and I'm lucky to be a part of the team. So this book examines how neoliberalism affects East Asia urban policies. And there's a different argument among these East Asian countries about how the country has transformed. But there's a common trend you are able to find from this East Asia country is decentralization in state power. And you also see the spatial diversification in national regulations, and you also see the growing economic disparity among localities and regions. But this process is not the same among these Asian cities, so the process pace dependent and varied. After this book, I have been continue to work on the idea of neoliberalism and how it affects urbanism. And I was very lucky to invite Hyung-Bang Shin, professor, to join the book project and focus on housing questions and the neoliberal influence. And in many cities around the world, housing increasingly become one of the key areas of urban contestations. And under the mounting pressure of commodification, privatization, and financialization, housing as a commodity is a major contributor to the urban crisis. This is a global phenomenon, but you also see it happening in cities in the East Asia developmental states. So just like Hyung-Bang has mentioned, that this Asian city has some common features. It's a highly condensed nature of urbanization and industrialization in the late 20th century. Worsened inequality is also a widespread trend in Asia. Many of the urban housing projects are targeted at the upper and middle class populations. Housing affordability has become a serious problem in Asian cities, and housing question caused protests as part of new political movements in the region. So this book as a focus on housing to explore the neoliberal influence on East Asia. The third one, called property state or property class, is done mostly by Western scholars like Angela Ray Forrest, and some Hong Kong scholar like Professor also will present later, Professor Yip. Their works also explore the class issue between the rich and poor and generational gap. And this work are mainly based on the empirical study on Hong Kong and Singapore. But you will see that Western scholars like Richard Reynolds and John Dowling, they also quite influential. They use the concept called asset-based welfareism and real estate as a means to achieve social security of families and their wealth accumulation, and the importance of assets for providing welfare. So you will see that that kind of case is more the case in Japan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. But if you look at the Taiwan case, somehow you will see that housing policy in Taiwan could hardly be said have the intention to design home ownership to constitute asset or poverty-based welfare until recently. It's more like a laissez-faire situation because people have no choice but solve their housing problems themselves due to the lack of government assistance. Yeah. This is the difference based on their research, and I found the experience in Taiwan is a little bit different. So you will see there are different pace of development among the East Asian cities, and the power relations in housing market in Taiwan. This housing system is developed by the nationalist government, came to Taiwan after 1949. And in the local politics, the nationalist government gave the local government the power of land development in order to share the political interests with local factions. This became a problem in Taiwan when Taiwan want to solve the problems of housing speculation and very, very high housing prices. Yeah. So this political structure somehow is really past dependent in Taiwan's context. It's not quite the same as Japan, Hong Kong, or Singapore. The fourth very important one is also recent is urban developmentalism. And you see that also Professor Hyung-Bang Shin is a pioneer scholar work on the perspective from Global East by joining the debate between Global North, Global South, and Global East become a new identity for the urban researcher doing the East Asia cities. Yeah, but you know the recent development done by Jamie Dowsett and Bacon Parr. It's quite interesting because they begin to talk about the scale of urban has been neglected. And so a lot more the books talking about the urbanization in East Asia developmental state. And I think particularly interesting is that they put a historical context based on the Cold War and post-Cold War transformation. So that kind of urban story become very touching, and it's also quite transnational to see those international influence based on this Cold War, post-Cold War context. And just very recent book done by article done by Manuel Ebers. He tries to talk about the concept of global East. And he says that based on his article, he just said that it's important to avoid dichotomizing and essentialize East Asia, because we did see a lot of research done by East Asia, and they try to talk about the difference, and somehow they try to make East Asia as a very unique character, and this is essentializing process can be very problematic. So he tried to say that keep the relational and comparative study, and it's important to check in the transnational actors, regulation, and markets. This is especially based on his research about housing financialization. And you do know that in the process of neo-liberalization, globalization of financial capital is another increasing dominant power. And then so Manuel Ebers' work on financialized housing is an important work. So the growth of financial capital become major drive for housing speculation around the world. The investors are transnational, and housing in the urban space become the target of global investment, which made the housing crisis worsen in major cities around the world. And based on this new perspective, I try to use the theory to analyze why housing prices in Taiwan never fall. And the reason why housing prices never fall is related to financial liberalization in the 1980s. Yeah. And the reason why there's a financial liberalization is primarily the pressure coming from the United States due to the trade imbalance. And this is also a pressure coming from the domestic financial needs, because before Taiwan's democratization, the financial system was controlled by the state. So there are very few options for the people. So after democratization, there's a demand from the people for financial liberalization. So after the liberalization, easier access to financing, increasing capital available for the housing market, and stimulated housing consumption, and hence has intensified the role of housing as a speculative role in Taiwan. And in order to prevent the housing bubble from bursting and to avert potential damage to the financial sector, the Taiwanese government continued to provide mortgage subsidies to sustain the housing market. So for this reason, housing prices never fall, and it also become a common mantra in Taiwan's society. So this is the influence from housing financialization. And the last one is gender. I have focused on gender research for a long time. This is one of my primary concerns. And you will see that this has been done many Western scholars and very fruitful research, and they use gender perspective to examine the urban space and the cities. And I participated in the book Women Housing. And this research intends to try to transform the cities and also ask the question that urban space, if the urban space play a supportive role to reduce women's domestic responsibilities and enhance social equality. Gender perspective are especially important for East Asian cities, because even though East Asia country has done very well economically, but their gender status has been quite far behind. You look at the rankings and shocking to see how far behind. So then I joined into my empirical study. So how I answer the first question about neoliberalization and democratization happening in Taiwan. So during the time of democratization, it has a huge surge of housing prices. It triggered the first housing movement. So the first housing movements, the major people are the middle class people, and they were looking for home ownership. So after the movement, the government provided more housing mortgage for those people to buy houses. So it affected the housing policy in Taiwan after 1990s that targeted at promoted the housing market. And you also see the intervention of the government in housing also changed from laissez-faire to market mechanism. So it's very interesting to see the role of the state actually increase. It increases level of intervention in housing market to benefit more homeowners and to protect the financial capital involved in real estate. The interests of homeowners and investors dominate the policy-making process in Taiwan. And then second, you will find that neoliberalization and financialization since the 1980s have intensified the characteristic of housing as a commodity. The role of the government deepens and change from laissez-faire to an active facilitator of the housing market. The state began to regulate the real estate market and play an active role with more market rules involved. So this is the case, yeah. So the lack of constraints on housing market leads to the problems of housing affordability and speculation. So then I jumped into the gender perspective, and then I especially look at the social housing and look at the recent development to see how it changed the women's status. But you will see that in Taiwan, even though the women's status has improved quite significantly, but the patriarchal culture and familiar ideology still quite strong in Taiwan, because you see the women continue to be responsible for housework. And in the welfare policy, there's a very strong familiar ideology, and it's shown that family as the primary providers of welfare for its members. So if you look at Taiwan, you can see the gap between men and women is getting better, but there's still the gap between men and women. And again, in East Asia country, there's a very interesting phenomenon, very low fertility rate, and it's become a very serious problem. So the reason why low fertility is related to welfare support of the family. And women continue to take heavy responsibility of the domestic work, and without sufficient support, it's very hard to improve these problems in East Asia. And then I look at the design of social housing, because I think social housing in Taiwan is a miracle, because before 2010, there's not even a term called social housing in Taiwan, and now it become a reality. So a lot of housing has been built. So I checked the design of social housing to see it play the role to reduce the domestic work for each families. It is compared to the housing past, the social housing in Taiwan is a big improvement, because we see a lot more neighborhood design, and there's a lot more public space and welfare park facilities, community facilities, yeah. But if I focus on the major user, I interviewed the women's organization for domestic violence, and you will see the way the social housing was designed. They actually don't have no idea who will be the users of the housing, including this women's organization. So they have to convert the 3-bedroom housing in order to accommodate their use. So they did a lot of modification. So So this is a question to see the way design actually that does not have a woman's point of view, and they also don't really take a lot of users' point of view into the design. This is a problem, but it's improving, yeah. But in general, you will see that in Taiwan, urban planning or architecture design does not have much women points of view. So then I go to the last one, the solutions, yeah. So based on the research on social housing, I think, again, social housing is a miracle. And the second movement is the disadvantaged people and young people. Middle class people are still the major group. But this is a time that housing prices go so expensive. So the middle class people realize it's impossible for them to buy houses. And so this is also the moment that renting become an option. And you also begin to reverse the trend of commodification in Taiwan. However, still a question that the number is still quite, if you look at percentage, is still not many, still a tiny proportion, yeah. And you also see that there's some problems of the housing system itself. That first, look at the social housing. There's a problem of social justice because the disadvantaged group of people actually is not the major target groups. So after the negotiation and the strong pressure from the social housing organization, so finally the ratio rose from 10% to 40%. And the rent is too expensive, and in the time they are able to stay there is quite limited. So there's still a problem of the social justice in the social housing. And secondly, that even though social housing become a new policy, it cannot change the housing system very much. So that the interest and the power of the private developers are not challenged very much. Yeah. So it's very hard to enact effective policies to control the housing speculation in Taiwan. So even though there are a lot of social housing available right now, but housing prices continue to rise. It seems endless. It could. So this is another problematic situation. So goes to the Taiwan's case. We have to the question that whether the movements are successful or not, and also whether are there other ways to improve the injustice planning practice. And so I go to kind of check the process of participation in Taiwan. This is based on the observation, yeah. So I'm looking for solution by seeking examples from other countries. And you know that United States is the original place of neoliberalism. The way they solve the housing problems for the disadvantaged people is not a good example. However, I live in a local college town called Laramie in the United States, and this town has 30,000 population. And I found that even it's not a good example, but I do see that how democracy has been functioning at a local scale in the United States. But in Taiwan, I do not see this kind of political system in the small towns. So for me, it's quite inspiring to see the way civil participation and people can join the meeting, discuss, and have the real power to decide the planning of the place they are living. Although the democracy system is not perfect in America, but this is kind of a possibility for people have the power to make their city better. Yeah. So this is the organization structure in Laramie, and there's a lot of civil participation committee. People be able to participate, and I don't see that in Taiwan. And another example is Vienna has been very inspired by Vienna because it's the most women-friendly city in the world. And the women's urban movement started in the 1990s. They started from several exhibitions about women's experience in the city. And they asked for putting women's everyday life, their experience into the urban design. And nowadays, it's not only about participation. That they established a women's planning office in a city government and really give power to the women. And this is the action that really can change the planning of the cities. Yes, this is another very inspiring example. And in the recent years, I went to Amsterdam often and very, very inspired by the culture of civic participation in Amsterdam. There are many discussion talks and to make people to learn new ideas. And there are many intensive discussion about many different urban projects. And they renovated a lot of urban space, or the space, and to make it become a public space for people to be able to discuss urban issues. You see the title called Who Owns the City? You see very interesting places and the tons of places like this. And so they always have a lot of discussions in order to reach the consensus. And this is another really great democratic example we can find. So based on the theoretical discussion, and to share my experience of research and how I look for the theories that are useful for my research. And I try to find solutions for Taiwan's housing problem. And I explore the structural problems and argue that in Taiwan, I would say that legalize the participation, giving power to the people, to the decision-making process in urban planning can be the best solution. So fortunately, in Taiwan, a lot of young people, they also realize this can be a solution. So this is one very fun organization organized by the young people, and they want to encourage more young people to participate in the local elections. So this is my presentation. Thank you for the invitation, and look forward to more discussions. Thank you. Can you stop?
Thank you very much. So for us living in Japan also, there is a lot of relevance from what Ms. Yi-Ling Chan just presented. And we're going to take some questions for two lectures. Any show of hands for questions? So while you're thinking, I have one question to Professor Yi-Ling Chan. So about the women's point of view in the architecture, it is missing, you said. And so if women's point of view are taken into the design, what do you think the design will be like?
Do I wait for the questions or answer right away?
Hello? So the question was hello? Ms. Yi-Ling Chan, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes. So the question was, you mentioned about the women's point of view lacking in the housing design. What is your idea of the design that reflects women's point of view?
I think in Taiwan's case, that it was built without knowing who would be the users. So the problem happened when the women's organization going to use the space. They found this is not a space designed for them, and they have to do a lot of modification. Yeah. So if in the beginning of the design, that kind of point of view should be consulted in the beginning. So they will make the housing more useful. And I look at Vienna's case, I will see the city when they design for women, and they have a lot of very good housing example based on the single mothers. They become a model of housing because they made everything within walking distance. And this actually inspired the concept called 15 cities, 15 minutes city, because they want everything is very close by, and then you can get everything you need within the neighborhood. Yeah, and a lot more detailed design that including safety and more neighborhood interactions. So I think a lot of cases you will be able to find in Vienna. They are very very good case. Yeah, and the mega city a lot of involvement coming from different people.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. In Japan, the specific community for the elderly people we have created, and the housing for the elderly has a specific design for the elderly, I think. Any other questions from anyone else? So this is Abe speaking. I have one question. I am a director of ERP. Thank you very much. I have questions, same questions to two of you. Since 10 years ago, Japan's are experiencing the declining of population. Taiwan, Korea, I think the population of these two countries will have started, I think, maybe started in 2020. So less people, meaning we need less place to live. So in Japan, the empty houses has become a problem, and we have new law. So by the law, these house or land would be returned to the state. Of course, the owner must pay, or the inheritant must pay to pay some money, so that state would take land or house back. But in Taiwan or Korea, with a declining population, probably you are going to have empty houses, extra houses, too many houses, because of the less and less population now. So how would you think about this trend of declining population with more and more empty houses in urban area? This is a question for two of the lecturers.
I can perhaps respond to that briefly and then hand over to Yi-Ling. Well, that's a very important question, and I think Japan does provide a lot of important lessons for a country like South Korea need to can learn from. What can be interesting in the case of South Korea is the continuous emphasis on building more, increasing the supply because of various critiques coming from the industry and people who are concerned about the rising price of housing, and therefore people basically asking for more house to be made available in order to curtail the increase in housing price. And this is where it becomes quite tricky, because the housing price increase has become more noticeable in select number of cities and not in every part of Korea. And especially this has become the story of Seoul, the capital city of the country. And the whole national policy, or the pressure on national policy to increase the supply of housing is largely based on the experience of housing market in Seoul or Seoul metropolitan region, where a very large number and a share of the population is concentrated, which is also producing a very interesting way of understanding what it means to supply more housing. And if in the case of Seoul, even though there has been continuous emphasis on supplying more housing units in Seoul in response to the increasing price of housing, the home ownership has not been increasing actually. The home ownership, I think, in Seoul is a little less than 50%, whereas for the entire country is about 57 or 58%. And the home ownership has never has not been increasing beyond 47-8% level, which basically means the more house you provide, they get purchased and invested by people who already have house and continuously made available as rental housing. And this house is going to create very interesting way of unevenness across the country. So basically seeing housing stocks continuously being subject to investment and rental dwellings because more, people want to stay in Seoul as much as possible or near Seoul, whereas regional cities are going to have the similar problem as can be observed in Japan. And there will be more unevenness basically experienced, and this is the problem of many regional cities nowadays, which are seeing the implementation of so-called urban regeneration policy, basically to address what to do with the declining population, the stagnation of the economy, which also produces the increasing degree of pressure on housing units remaining vacant with a shrinking population. So I think there has not been a major debate on what to do in this case, what the state can do and what intervention the state can make. And I think the way the state may come forward to actually acquire these properties and put these into some other uses will be something I would imagine very important and necessary. But how that is going to what forms that they will take and what uses can be envisaged after state appropriation, and how that is going to produce a very different way of seeing urban life and urban restructuring. I think those debates are probably not lacking, still quite lacking at the moment, and too much emphasis is being made on the possibility, on the prospect of how this property hegemony investment can continue, because that's what people are completely obsessed with, and therefore I think it's important to actually create a space of what it means to have an urban life in the context of shrinking population, and that's really a critical area for academic and intellectual and progressive input.
Yeah, in Taiwan, we also there's a lot of news report looking at Japan as an example, and people will anticipate maybe in the future the housing prices will drop. But the problem that you look at the number in Taiwan, the vacant housing is already an issue, but the housing prices never drop. And the reason why it hardly drop is because it related to the power structure first, and the second related to the tax system. So the property tax in Taiwan is very low, so it's very easy. You buy the house and let it vacant because you don't need to pay a lot of property tax. And another problem of the tax system, it actually encouraged a lot of company to buy houses as a way to avoid their taxes. Yeah. So this is a kind of two tax structure. They make housing become a good investment because you can. It's a way you can kind of save the money that way. Yeah. And then if you go to the power structure, that's why I say that democratic change this participation system is quite important, because in Taiwan's local politics, these local private developers has a very strong interest in the land, and so if they know, if you cannot change this power structure, it's very hard to like Japan. There's a lot of solutions you can solve the problem, but the power structure is not giving the people the power to change it because it's so dominated by those private developers. So it's very high vacant housing, but housing prices continue to rise. Yeah, and the problems get worse because now a lot of capital they return from a lot of now business, Taiwanese business return from China, so they bring back more money. And so it's kind of crazy in Taiwan at this moment. The tension between Taiwan and China actually trigger the housing prices because more money coming back. And this is a good way actually to reduce for the company. They can avoid taxes by buying property. So in Taiwan, this is kind of a situation going on.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Okay. So, actually, I have a question to Professor Shin. In Japan, of course, we make investment and increase wealth, and that would be reserved for the future after retirement, for example. And because of that, the wealth is accumulated in the wealthy people, and vulnerable people or poor people have no accessibility to the housing. I think these two trends, wealth people and poor people, are related. It should be related. And in your lecture, that is related, Mr. Shin. But this theory is pretty new. Or is it only Japan that we haven't have this kind of discussion up until now? Are we the only country that is late in this theory?
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think it's I think this discussion about, for example, the asset-based welfare or assetization is something that has been increasingly popular, and I think there have also been similar discussions being made by some Japanese scholars as well. For example, I can think of Professor Yosuke Hiroyama, who is a housing expert, who has been working on this for quite a while, and who has produced very interesting and insightful papers. I can think of his paper like in 2009 that came out from, I think it's from Urban Studies Journal, co-authored with late Professor Ray Forrest, which was looking at how the bubble collapse was producing a different shared impact on different groups of housing cohorts, people who are entering the housing market just before the collapse of the bubble, versus people who enter the housing market home ownership long before the bubble collapse, and therefore discussing how this impact has bubble collapse had a differential impact on them. And he also has written on the output publication with late Professor Ray Forrest to discuss the neoliberalization of the housing market in Asia and in relation to Japan as well. So, and I think there are some already discussed in this area, but I guess the more important part is to have cross-disciplinary dialogues more, where the discussion of inclusive society, inequities, urban poverty, to be more actively having discussions with also colleagues who are working in the areas of housing, urban studies, and so on, to have this kind of rich discussions of what it means to talk about urban space, what it means to talk about assetization, and what it means also to talk about inequities and injustice experienced by poor people who never have this protection by the state, full protection by the state, and also lack of capacity to protect themselves.
はい、どうもありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So, discussion involving a number of areas will be necessary going forward, and I fully agree with that idea. Any further questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, I want to ask Professor Shin a question because he mentioned about social movement on housing. So I don't have much experience on other countries like South Korea, but I mean, in Taiwan and in Hong Kong, the social movement connecting to housing in the 80s and the 90s basically of so-called collective consumption nature. So it's about public housing or about the state intervention on housing in the case of Taiwan. But you also mentioned that because of the change of the nature of housing or the change of the real estate hegemony, would it have an impact on that so-called collective consumption nature of housing movement? So now it's not just on so-called demanding the state to do something, but rather is retreating to consideration of individual benefit on individual gain. Because when you ask the government to suppress house price, it would perhaps annoy the majority of people in the city. So what the direction or the nature of urban social movement on housing that will head towards because of that so-called property-based so-called development in Asian cities?
That's very important question, and I'm sure, and I mean, you have a lot more to say with regard to this issue, and well, as far as my understanding is concerned, I would imagine each society would have its own strategy, tailor-made strategy. And that can be one a starting point, given the local histories of how these movements have been shaping, and how the local housing market has been shaping, and how the role of the state and the nature of the state used to be understood and has been and came out to exist. Having said that, I suppose I think two strategies can be thought of simultaneously. One is asking for greater protection by the state if the state protection is minimal. I think this is what Yi-Ling has been also emphasizing in the context of Taiwan, where the state just kind of hasn't done enough, even to the level of South Korea, where South Korean colleagues will probably see the role of the state in South Korea also not sufficient enough when it comes to public housing provision. But Taiwan is way below the expectation of, and therefore that becoming the main slogan, one of the main slogans, a greater involvement of the state in public housing provision, which is kind of making an emphasis on the need of the state engaging with the collective consumption in the way in the Western economies we used to experience. And this is what I guess the whole idea of how collective consumption used to be organized before the 1970s in the Western economies, where the state was more, where some Western states with the kind of social democratic tradition used to engage with, and coming to face a lot of challenges, and therefore going through this neoliberalization and withdrawal from the direct provision of housing, and housing itself being subject to commodification. And in that context, what can be demanded as part of urban social movement will be quite different from what can be also understood and imagined in Asia, because of that kind of a differentiating trajectories of how the state used to be understood and used to involve. So if the direct provision of some direct intervention of the state is something that can be demanded on the one hand, the other aspect can be more about building upon the longer history of how individuals were asked to, or families were required to find their own strategies of survival, and this is where the state has not been heavily involved. And I guess this is where we can think of other ways of commoning the resource as much as we can. And probably this is what Professor Baekhyun Park in the second part of the event today will be talking about, where the commoning strategies to mobilize the remaining capacity to make alternative provision of how housing can be consumed and produced that can be differentiated from direct provision by the state. And I think these two strategies will probably have to go hand in hand together rather than depending on just one aspect. And this is where I was kind of speaking to some Korean audience a couple of years ago. Such strategies I find to be more viable in regional cities outside Seoul, where, and this goes back to the previous question about the experience of Japan. A lot of these the Dayton units that can be available in regional cities. I think these are probably a very useful starting point for thinking about commoning practices, to think of alternative models of housing provision, rather than sticking to the existing model of private ownership and individual home ownership based in a model of investment, but investment that can be pulling resources from collectives, so that we can think of this urban commons being emerging on that basis, and that can probably have more persuasive discourses that can be acceptable to the people, because once you start thinking presenting this kind of opportunity, that it already emerges because there are units and lands which are not used and which are not occupied and remaining vacant and therefore detrimental to civic life. You can kind of use this as a way of persuading the general population. Look, if you are not able to make use of this for individual consumption, why don't you put them together to make them as commons that can be used for collective benefit, and the state not necessarily having to be part of this provision. You can give this out to local groups who can have better control and management, and who have a better understanding of what their local demand is. So I think I stop there. And thank you very much for the question. And I would probably love to hear your own views at some point later.
社会運動論に連なる話かと思いますけれども、この点についてイーリン先生何か補足することありますか？
I think it is related to a social movement, but so can I say a few words? This is Nakayama. So Japanese current situation, Housing Safety Net Act was enacted, and in that law, for vulnerable area with lower income who have very little power to acquire their own houses. Under that law, the vacant unit would be transformed and reformed for those poor people. And at local level, there is a council to promote that idea.
and NPO or private real estate company have been involved to utilize these vacant units. So that movement has spread nationally. What is important is, as Dr. Shin says, not direct provision, but involvement or engagement of private sector would be important. And it should be flexible. For example, not just a one-fits-all type strategy, but a housing market which can be flexible and which can accommodate many different diversified homes owners. I think that kind of social movement should be linked to academic study, and that could be a very big global movement. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think that's a very important insight. So we have already passed the scheduled time. I'm afraid we haven't had enough time for discussion, but I would like to stop here. I would like to conclude the morning session. So to lecturers, thank you very much. Dr. Shin and Professor Yi-Ling Chen, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's give them a big hand of applause, although it's an online, but you use a reaction button and we can express them our gratitude and we can send them a big hand of applause. Thank you very much, Mr. Shin and Mr. Chen and other lecturers. We have 9 presenters. Thank you very much for all of you. So let's take a lunch break now. Just half an hour, sorry. Lunch break for 30 minutes. And during this break time, I'm going to show you the URP Plaza Week video. Maybe within 10 minutes, I'd like to put that video on screen. This video is about 20 minutes. If you have time, please enjoy our video, maybe over lunch. Okay, thank you very much. Let's take a break. 30 minutes break. Thank you very much.
This is